everyone, welcome back to this retrospective series on the Primarchs and their legions. I am the Darklight Emissary, here to guide you through a brief summary on each of these legions and the Primarchs. This episode is on the 8th Legion, the Night Lords, and their Primarch, the Night Haunter, Konrad Curze. So, to start off with this legion, they are your quintessential raiding and terror and hit and run legion. They were basically the Emperor's terror squad, terror legion of soldiers meant to punish worlds that did not comply with the Emperor's will. Basically, if you were a very stubborn world that would not comply after being previously taken over, the Night Lords would be sent to change your mind on that. And the way the Night Lords would do that, they would tend to come to your world at night, knock out any kind of communication across the planet, and then they would capture people and torture them, and possibly feed that torture recording to everyone on the planet. And usually worlds would capitulate rather than allow more of their people to be destroyed this way. And so the Night Lords, just the suggestion of them coming would often make worlds recomply or make them comply harder than they did before. They are a legion meant to just bring the Emperor's cold hard justice to anyone that did not want to be part of the Imperium, even after being complied to. Now, it is not known whether the Emperor approved of their more harsh tactics or not. They would do absolutely horrifying stuff that I won't elaborate on here, but you can go read about it on the wiki or in any books featuring Night Lords. Basically, if you can imagine it, they did it. And I'll basically leave it at that here, but they are probably at the top of the most horrifying legion to ever have unleashed on your world. They wouldn't simply take it over. They would make you want to be taken over through abject fear. And they got this mentality quite from their Primarch, Konrad Curze. Now, Konrad is a very conflicted Primarch. He is, by all intents and purposes, I would consider him mentally ill or deficient. He has the gift of foresight, but it was a curse to him more than a gift. He would see horrible futures, and he believed that they would all come to pass. And he was kind of the type that would feed those prophecies, though. Like, he would make them come to pass because he could not see any way around that foresight, or he never really questioned it as being real or not. He just thought it was all the truth. So you had that problem with Konrad. And then the world he landed on, Nostromo, is a perpetual world of darkness. And when he crash landed there as a child, the world is basically ran by a bunch of very vicious crime syndicates and gangs and other criminal elements. And Konrad basically acted like a very horrifying version of Batman. If he saw a crime taking place, he would dispatch the offender, and he started doing this so reliably that any crime, according to Konrad, dropped to 0% on the world, and he basically became its leader at that point, because if he caught wind of you doing something against his will, you were dead. There was no trial, there was no don't do that again, there was no sent off to an asylum, there was nothing except finding you dead the next day in often horrifying circumstances. He would not necessarily kill you quickly, so and the evidence was apparent when people would find you the next day. So people eventually, it was like, don't do this or the Night Haunter will come get you. And it was a promise more than a rumor, by the end of it. Eventually the Emperor comes and finds him, and even when the Emperor finds him, Konrad basically kind of screams and sees nothing but a horrible future And the Emperor's like, don't worry, I'm here now. And Konrad's like, that really doesn't help, sorry. And as far as we know, the Emperor really never promised to save anything or help him. And it's kind of there's been a lot of speculation and discussion over the years of why the Emperor would give a damaged Primarch like Konrad the power of a legion, and one as scary and already scary like the Night Lords. But he was given that legion, and he was often given tasks to bring a very exact justice upon rebellious worlds. And at first, Nostromo was sending Konrad troops, like potential recruits that were their best warriors, from the, most powerful gangs on the world. But after Konrad left, the world regressed back to its old ways, and so they started sending only the worst criminals to Konrad's forces. And this is something that I don't understand why Konrad didn't ever go back to rectify and say, hey, stop that, sending your best people. Like, he just complained about it, seemingly, and let that keep happening, and it kind of brought his legion into a degenerate state over time. And I mean, part of that is, his fault, but he never took really the responsibility for it. He self-loathed himself, but he kind of blamed the Legion for being the Legion, despite him not really taking actions to overcome it, to overcome those problems. And so Konrad eventually, one of the closest Primarch to him was Fulgrim, and Fulgrim had taught Konrad everything he knew about, like greater strategic battle and things like that. And Konrad eventually came to Fulgrim about the visions he saw, and the visions that Konrad saw were of the Horus Heresy and of the Civil War coming. And Fulgrim was concerned of hearing this, and Fulgrim, I think he actually was concerned, but he told Rogal Dorn, who was also in this theater of battle. And Rogal Dorn, as I previously mentioned, was kind of not known for his breadth of emotional empathy, and so, he went and confronted Konrad about it, but in a way I imagine a police officer might, and that caused them to come to blows, and Konrad was imprisoned to stand trial for people, attacking Dorn, basically. But Konrad broke free of his confines, killed a few legionaries, both the Imperial Fists and Emperor's Children guarding him, and he got back to his legion, and they fled into the darkness of space. And one of his first orders of business was to go to Nostromo and obliterate that world. And as far as I know, Konrad is the only Primarch and Legion to have destroyed their own homeworld, especially amongst the traitor forces. And then they went to the Galactic East and started terrorizing things there. And they from that point on, they were basically the first Legion to officially go rogue. Not necessarily rebel, but they were basically just out in the wind, and no one kind of knew how to bring them back. And then later on, the Horus Heresy starts, and the Night Lords were asked to help bring Horus, to heel as a loyalist legion. And it's kind of speculated on in some of the stuff I was reading that the reason this happened is because the Imperium is so big that, it just wasn't filtered through yet that Konrad had gone rogue. So, they were just desperate to, try to bring Horus and the other traitors to justice. And they just asked everyone on the list that still was considered loyalist. Obviously, they got more than just the Night Lords wrong in that list. So, the Night Lords show up to Istvan 5 and betray the loyalists there and take part in the Drop Site Massacre, which was the first time the Night Lords were considered as openly rebellious. And the first captain of the Night Lords is one of my favorites and a lot of people's favorites, Sevatar. And Sevatar is coined with being the first person, the first legionary on the Chaos traitor side to say death to the false emperor in combat during the Drop Site Massacre. And it was just fun reading that takes place in the first Heretic book. And he says death to the false emperor for the very first time. Now, an interesting thing about the Night Lords, for their kind of insane darkness culture like feel and their criminality, they did not, at least to start off with, like chaos. Sevatar being foremost amongst those. Sevatar was one of the best warriors of the 30k era, and at the top of being a warrior in that legion. And he despised the warp and chaos corruption, and so did Konrad. They were very offended by seeing what Lorgar's legion had become, since some of them had become partially possessed by demons from the warp. They were like, really? You'd corrupt yourself this way? Despite them, being reveling in some horrifying tactics and things themselves, they felt themselves that they would never stoop that low, and eventually the Night Lords, after the Dropsite Massacre, they kind of went off on their own again into the Galactic East, and I don't know if there's an explicit order from Horus to do that, but it seemed to serve his will, so Horus didn't really try to bring them back. And when they were out in the Galactic East, they came into conflict with the Dark Elves, oh my goodness, the Dark Angels. Not the Dark Eldar or Dark Elves. They came into conflict with the Dark Angels, and the Dark Angels completely slaughtered them, because here's the thing about the Night Lords. They are still Astartes, and they are still, tough warriors, but I think they always seem to have problems with fighting other legionaries. And the reason for that, it's said, is because they're criminals without really any warrior talent. But really, I think it's because for a large part of the Crusades, they didn't have to do that much fighting because their reputation was so horrifying. No one wanted to fight them. So they would often, hit targets that would normally have been harder targets if it was just a stand-up fight. But because the enemy knew that the consequences would be so horrifying if they did fight, they often surrendered before any fighting could take place. So I think that the Night Lords were never really tempered in battle like the other legions that just straight up fought really horrible campaigns and came out of it, a stronger, refined force. I think that's part of it, but and the Dark Angels are definitely one of those. The Dark Angels went into several very intense furnaces and were a very powerful legion. And so they greatly diminished the Night Lords from the rest of the Heresy era. Konrad ended up stuck on the capital ship of the Lion, and the Lion hunted him for a while on his own ship. Sevatar was also kept prisoner on that ship, along with several Night Lords, and the rest of the Night Lords scattered into the void. They were gone. And so some Night Lords regathered back together and did participate in the Siege of Terra, but they were probably one of the lower represented legions for the traitor side on Terra at that time. There was some mention of them, raiding groups on the planet, but they really did not participate nearly as much as other legions did. Konrad eventually makes it off that capital ship and ends up on Macragge, the homeworld of Robot Guilliman and the Ultramarines. And long story short, he ends up getting captured, and Sanguinius of the Blood Angels puts him in a stasis capsule and launches him into space. So Konrad ends up out of the story during the siege time, and for a little while after the siege during the Scouring. Now, during the Scouring era, the Night Lords were already kind of a broken up raiding force as far as a legion goes. They did not retreat into the Eye of Terror like the rest of the other legions did. They continued to just harass and raid and do as Night Lords did. And eventually, Konrad does get found and rejoin his legion. And he commands them for a little while, but eventually it gets to a point where his visions of his own death are coming to the time period he knows it's gonna happen in. And he hears of an assassin coming for him. And he tells his troops, let this assassin in. I'm going to be vindicated for, my gift here. He had for all of his darkness, Konrad had a very big belief in justice, and he believed he did need to be punished for what he did. He did not like the monster he was, despite the monster he became. And so this assassin shows up, and Konrad looks this assassin in the eye and says, vindication is the better part of justice or something to that effect, and allows the assassin to behead him. And then the assassin tries to leave, and several of the Night Lords, the Night Lords were told not to pursue, but they're Night Lords, so they did pursue. One of them did kill the assassin, and that ends the story of Konrad. He ends up as one of the dead Primarchs. His legion broke apart even further after that, and up into the current 40k era, the Night Lords are basically a bunch of disparate warbands, and they're some of the worst forces you can come across, because they still have kept with tradition of their, terror tactics. And often if you come across one of their ships, you will just hear a whispering voice on your ship's Vox feeds that say, we are coming, we come for you. And then they will try to invade your ship and take you back as a prisoner to be tortured, probably, because that's what they do. Several of the warbands have fallen to chaos by this point. Some of the Night Lords probably still abhor chaos, but it's less of a thing they care about, I'm sure, in that era. And several of their leaders are definitely chaos corrupted and chaos champions by the time of 40k especially. Some during the Siege era, some during the Horus Heresy era as well, but less back then. Back then, especially when Savitar was still around, if he was running things, absolutely no chaos corruption was allowed. They didn't really care about Horus's plans. They just did not like the Imperium and didn't like any authority really being, kind of a crime group of a legion. And it makes you wonder why the Emperor didn't really see that coming with them. This kind of goes back to how Konrad was, and why the Emperor didn't try to figure out Konrad's issues or talk to him about his visions. Because, the thing about the Emperor is, he's a major psyker. Several of the sons were psychers. You'd think the one seeing visions, you might want to at least get those visions recorded down and then talk to him about them. Because, the Emperor is not going to just think that they are false visions necessarily. He probably would have liked to know about them. But I'm sure Konrad did not bring them up to the Emperor because he was either afraid of the Emperor or didn't want to, or I don't know, maybe he was questioning the visions himself, even though he tended not to. And he definitely didn't want to bring it up again after the way Rogal Dorn responded to it. And Rogal Dorn hated psychers, really, so that didn't really help matters either. But the Emperor never really did anything to help him, and I always wonder why. There's been a lot of speculation on that, so that's really it for this Legion. There's a lot of really good books out for this Legion. I haven't read all of them. I would recommend reading the Night Lords Omnibus, the Lord of Night novel for these guys. There's a lot of really good characters like Savitar, and I guess to mention Savitar's fate, we don't know much about him after the Heresy era. We know he lives past the Horus Heresy as a prisoner of the Dark Angels, but we do not know his fate yet. It has been said by the authors that mostly have written about him that he does not make it to 40k era like several of the other traitor champions, but we will probably get a book wrapping up his story during the Scouring era or beyond that, I guess. And I think people look forward to that because he's definitely one of the better characters in the setting, one of the better warriors, things like that. So anyway, that's a brief overview of Konrad Curze and the Night Lords Legion. As always, leave a like if you liked it, subscribe for more. We will be going into the 9th Legion next, and as always, bring your light into the dark places, and have a great night or day wherever you are. Thank you, and talk to you soon.